Welcome back. This unit, we are going to continue our discussion of data, democracy, and disinformation. Next slide. In this and following many presentations, we're going to look in a little bit of depth at two documents. The first of those is the indictment in the case U.S. versus Internet Research Agency. This is an indictment brought in early 2018 from investigations by Special Counsel Robert Mueller and the U.S. Department of Justice. Later, we will consider a report by the United States Senate Committee on Intelligence, specifically a report regarding Russian active measures into campaigns, particularly in the lead up to the 2016 US presidential election. Next slide. I want to begin by looking at the front page of the indictment. Now, in an earlier presentation, I described some strategies for approaching legal documents like this in the Senate report. But I also want to take a moment here to point out that every little thing on a document like this matters. So you can tell a great deal about what is going on by just looking at some of the header information, some of the metadata that's embedded into this document. So first, you can tell where this case is going to be prosecuted if it ever ends up being prosecuted. You can see that it's in the District of Columbia, right? So it's not being prosecuted in the Southern District of New York. It's not being prosecuted in the Western District of Madison, the Western District of Wisconsin, which is in Madison. Rather, it is in DC. Moreover, you can tell it's a federal case because it's in the U.S. District Court. It's not in, say, State of Wisconsin Court, or the DC Municipal Court, or Virginia, or Maryland, right? It is in the federal court system. You can tell it's a criminal indictment. It's not a civil case. That means that there are criminal penalties attached to the statutes that it's being prosecuted under. You can tell who the parties are, right? So the party bringing the case on the top of the left column there is the United States. So the full weight of the United States government is behind this prosecution. And you can see that there is a mix of defendants. There are several corporate entities: the Internet Research Agency, Concord Management and Consulting, Concord Catering. Catering, why? Well, that's related to one of the individual defendants, Evgeny Prigozhin. I always have trouble with that one. It's Prigozhin. And you can tell the statutes under which this case is attempting to be prosecuted. 18 U.S. Code, sections 2, 371, 1349, 1028, on the top of the right-hand column there. Now, why is this important? Well, this gives you a lot of information about where to look for more information about the case. It lets you go to the U.S. statutes and read what the basis of the charges are. It allows you to go and look up more information about these individual defendants and so forth, right? So lots of information just contained there. We aren't going to focus on that, but it's always worth being careful or being cognizant that stuff is put into documents like this for a reason. All right, next slide. But let's get into the actual case. U.S. versus Internet Research Agency. U.S. versus IRA. Who is the IRA? Well, the IRA, that acronym actually applies to lots of different things. Irish Republican Army, individual retirement accounts, Illinois Restaurant Association. Rather, this is the Internet Research Agency. The Internet Research Agency, next slide, is a company. I mean, it is a company. And it looks like a company. It has employees. It has lots of employees. It has contracts with computer server operators. It has purchasing contracts for computer equipment. It has employment contracts. It has other kinds of contracts, for example, with Concord Management and Concord Catering. right? So it looks like a company, it operates like a company, it has kind of this imprimatur or this status by being actually incorporated. It's a limited liability corporation within Russia, right? Now, just because it's a company doesn't mean that its motive is primarily uh, capitalist in nature, right? It isn't necessarily trying to make money. It is rather doing the work that others want it to do. So, what work is that? Well, it's received backing from Prigozhin, and that backing came in several forms. It included seed money. It included expertise, including from highly trained computer and social media specialists. It also receives a kind of protection, right? So its sponsor, its guiding star, Prigozhin, enjoys a working relationship with Vladimir Putin, and that means that it more or less is protected from investigation or curtailment by the Russian state. Some of the money flowing towards the IRA came from Concord companies, Concord Management and Consulting and Concord Catering. That seems odd. Those are indeed more what you might think of as more normal businesses. They are businesses that are involved in all kinds of business consulting services, but also food production services. Why is that? Next. Well, it's because of Prigozhin. Prigozhin is he is indeed a caterer, a chef, and he is someone who has been in the employ of Putin and the Russian state, in part because the apparatus, the organizational apparatus around Vladimir Putin is mostly constituted by people that he trusts. And Prigozhin, he was a criminal early in his career. After that, he began working in food services and catering and became closely associated with Russian state actors, and now enjoys a position in Putin's inner circle. So he has a couple of companies. That's the Concord Management and Consulting and the Concord Catering Company. And through those can take actions that are aligned with Russian state interests in other kinds of ways. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. That's a little more in the realm of international relations and understanding sort of the social atmosphere around which the IRA conducted its business, but a little bit of interesting history. I actually put a link to a news story about Prigozhin, but not the key thing that we're interested in here, but interesting nonetheless. Next slide. So what did the IRA actually do? Well, as you can see from the indictment, they engaged, according to the U.S. Department of Justice, engaged in a conspiracy to defraud, this is a quote from the indictment, a conspiracy to defraud the United States by impairing, obstructing, and defeating the lawful functions of the government through fraud and deceit for the purposes of interfering with U.S. political and electoral process. Why is that sort of a stilted way to phrase things? Why is it phrased that way? Well, the idea is that this phrasing mimics the fraud and the fraud against the U.S. statutes under which the people in this indictment are being prosecuted, right? So it's phrased in this way because the criminal actions that the U.S. Has alleged is a conspiracy. Conspiracy is generally the actions of two or more persons to engage in criminal conduct and engaging in overt actions in furtherance of that criminal conduct. That's a long way of saying people getting together and deciding to commit a crime and acting to commit that crime, right? So that's a general thing, conspiracy, and the underlying crime that they're accused of conspiring to commit is defrauding the United States and defrauding by interfering with the electoral processes, right? That's what this indictment sort of sits on. Next slide. So what does that mean? Well, it means that they violated, and this is the statute that is alleged, one of the statutes that's alleged within the indictment, that they violated U.S. Code Section 371. So that statute criminalizes actions and conspiracies to defraud the United States. What does it mean to defraud the United States? That's not spelled out in that statute. Rather, it is spelled out and adhered to in case law. Right? So other prosecutions have spelled out what defrauding the United States actually means. Next slide. So one of the most important cases goes back over 100 years, and it's called Haas v. Henkel. It's a U.S. Supreme Court case. The citation is at the bottom of the slide. And basically, defrauding the United States doesn't require defrauding the United States for money. So, for example, you can defraud somebody else, for example, by lying to them about some commercial interaction and getting their money. So you might say to another person, I have a business, we have a business plan, I have expertise in, say, designing and implementing computer systems, but in fact you have no such expertise, you have no intention of doing the work, they pay you to do the work and you run off, or you do shoddy work, or something like that. You could be, if you misrepresent what you're doing, that is a misrepresentation that somebody else relies on and undermine, and it harms them financially, right? That's classic fraud. But defrauding the United States doesn't have to be monetarily. You can defraud the United States monetarily, for example, by collecting Social Security benefits. Suppose that a relative of yours is retired and collects Social Security benefits. They die, you don't tell anybody, you continue to collect their benefits and cash their checks. That's defraud. That's fraud, that's financial. Here, fraud can be action that impairs the efficiency, this is the bolded text, and destroys the value of the U.S. operations that it aims to take to be fair, impartial, and accurate. So the idea is that the United States is trying to engage in fair, impartial, and reasonably accurate election processes, right? And the actions that the IRA and the other individuals have taken on undermine that, and that is a crime. Right? So that's the thing alleged in this indictment. So if you were to, for example, create a mass information campaign that suggested that people could vote in the presidential election up until December 1st. And people relied, they believed you, they had reason to believe in you, they changed their actions as a result, then you would be similarly engaged in fraud, right? So keep that in mind when election season comes around. There are lots of actions that might actually fit within this fraud statute. But this is what rests. This is the definition of fraud upon which the indictment rests. Next slide. So how did they do this? Well, this is where I think it's easy for you to read through the indictment. I'm not going to spell out everything here. My point is to give you a sense of where the indictment is coming from. That's the hard part. That's the specialized legal part. You can read the facts. So what did they do? Go and read. It's a fascinating indictment. What did they do? Well, they did a number of things, among them creating social media profiles based on false personas, right? Misidentifying who they were, creating social media personas. They traveled to the United States. This is an overt act. They agreed. They were going to travel to the United States under false pretenses. They were posing as tourists, coming for just personal reasons, or as legitimate business actors, but were instead, again, they lied about their reason for entry into the United States. They're not being charged for that, but they're being charged for misrepresenting themselves and engaging in this further conspiracy. And they were, in fact, engaged in Russian intelligence operations. What did they do when they were here? They communicated with grassroots political activists, like people on the ground, to learn about the political system and get a sense of where the soft spots were in U.S. electoral politics, right? So they probably learned things about what states were most likely to be vulnerable or effective uses of their resources for misinformation campaigns, right? So probably not going to target people in states that were clearly going to vote one way or clearly going to vote another way, but where that was less sure, right? So they learned about that, and they learned about what issues were particularly hot button and how those issues were framed and understood and likely to get people riled up and angry. Next slide. They use, based on those misrepresented profiles, they use social media platforms to communicate with U.S. persons. So this wasn't just throwing stuff out there. They communicated with people in the U.S. sometimes by creating political groups that mimicked genuine groups, right? So some of the titles of those groups that gained genuine U.S. followers were these were on Facebook, on Twitter, Instagram, other social media platforms. Included named groups such as Secured Borders, Blacktivists, United Muslims of America, Army of Jesus. So these track the kinds of names that genuine non-ersatz political groups in the United States had. And so people looked at them, thought they sounded like the kind of thing that they might already be involved with, and spent their time and effort and mental energy engaging with these groups. They purchased ads on social media. We've seen that they used the ad services to identify targets based on data collected and analyzed and used within these platforms to purchase effective ads. And they did this all the while obscuring their identities, right? So they purchased space on US-based servers so that social media companies could not, and other observers could not easily track where these groups and these profiles were originated from, right? So they obscured the ability of others to collect useful data about what the source of the ads actually were, right? So on the one hand, they're using data collection and data analysis to target ads, but they were thwarting defensive efforts at trying to figure out what the source of ads actually were. Next slide. Now, they used that same data to target messaging and advertisements from personal data that they collected in other kinds of prior activities, as we mentioned in the earlier slide. And they used the membership in groups as well as social media data and the AdSense or the advertising platforms to coordinate actual in-person political events, right? So this was not just an informational issue. Rather, it was using data to collect. Data collected to target in-person political events that got people on the ground in the United States to get together and be angry at one another. Moreover, they destroyed evidence of what they had done by getting rid of records about their server activities and their profile activities. Right now, that itself is not a crime. However, it does speak to intent. That is what they were trying to get done, as well as evidence of coordinated activity, right? If they're destroying each other's evidence, then that is another overt act that advances the conspiracy to defraud the United States. Next slide. In addition, they conducted wire fraud. That is, they were able to use false information to gain financial information from people, take money. Wire fraud, or use wires to, that is, wired communications. Internet is a form of wired communication, even if you're using wireless, to deprive companies of legitimate sources of revenue. Right? So they also engaged in identity theft. They stole people's identities in order to, again, obscure what they were doing, obscure data collection about their activities. Next slide. Now, so what? Well, a couple of things to keep in mind here. So this course is about data and algorithms and values attached to them. And this is a way in which the large data collected by social media organizations about individuals and the ability to use that and leverage that in order to better target audiences and put lots of like-minded people together is a value that is implicated by those tools, right? So it is not just the fact that there is fraud going on, but it also that fraud undermines some other kind of value. So you might think that data science and machine learning and algorithmic decision systems are contained, right? So we might think of data collection and data analysis as being morally acceptable or morally justifiable in a kind of narrow sense, right? So yeah, maybe Facebook collecting data, maybe Facebook collecting information about how people use the internet and the kinds of things they interact with and the kinds of groups that form coherent wholes in order to target advertising. Maybe that is fine. It makes a certain amount of sense. Well, fair enough. However, it implicates deeper democratic values because it is exploitable. It's exploitable in this kind of way. It's exploitable by entities that want to target, want to use data about individuals and knowledge about cognitive psychology and human behavior in order to build identities and create groups that cause a breakdown of social and political cohesion within countries, including the United States, right? So to think of data science narrowly as collection, analysis of data and building algorithms is a mistake, right? Rather, you need to think about it as implicating these deeper and broader values. End of this mini presentation.